It started like any other episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, a packed studio, the audience buzzing with anticipation, and Maher pacing the stage with that sly grin that signals he's about to go for the jugular. But this time, his target wasn't a politician, a Hollywood actor, or even a corporate titan. It was Prince Harry, the spare who had become, in Maher's words, a royal mistake. Maher began softly warming the crowd up with his trademark smirk. He teased late-night culture, mocked the absurdities of Hollywood, and then, without warning, pivoted. He leaned forward, eyes sparkling, and dropped the opening strike. So Prince Harry is still talking. Still. This guy has more interviews than Tom Cruise has stunts. How many times can a guy say my truth? At this point, Harry's truth has more sequels than Star Wars. The crowd erupted. Applause and laughter filled the studio. Maher stood back, letting the reaction wash over him, his smirk widening as if he knew he'd just landed the first devastating blow. And that was the genius of it. Maher didn't yell. He didn't exaggerate. He simply pointed out what millions had already noticed: Harry's constant appearances, his endless retelling of the same story, the controlling father, the wicked press, the suffocating palace. Each retelling wasn't just self-indulgent, it was tiresome. And Maher turned that exhaustion into comedy. He mimicked Harry's voice, soft and reflective, as though reading from a therapist's notebook. Yes? Well, in chapter 14 of my life, I discovered that cameras are bad. But please buy my book and watch my Netflix series. The audience howled. People slapped their knees, clapped, and whistled. Maher grinned, pacing again, feeding off the energy. He knew he wasn't just roasting Harry, he was giving voice to the very fatigue the public felt. The groan every time Harry popped up in yet another headline or Netflix promo. Maher delivered the setup flawlessly. Harry as the man who wouldn't stop talking. The man who kept selling his truth like it was a franchise blockbuster. The audience was primed and Maher wasn't finished. He was only getting started. With the crowd in his palm, Maher twisted the knife deeper. He shifted gears, no longer mocking Harry's endless talking, but instead targeting the very foundation of Harry's public persona, his claim to victimhood. Maher leaned on the desk, tilted his head, and said in a tone dripping with sarcasm, "So let me get this straight. You grew up in castles, had servants, private jets, a global audience that bowed to you, and your big complaint is that your dad didn't hug you enough? Try being a millennial with student debt, Harry. That's trauma." The studio erupted. Applause thundered, and the laughter was so loud Maher had to pause for nearly 30 seconds before continuing. His smirk widened. He knew this was the knockout angle, the absurdity of a man who had lived his entire life in unimaginable privilege, presenting himself as the world's most relatable. Victim Maher wasn't just mocking Harry, he was exposing the contradiction. Harry wanted sympathy for growing up in a palace while millions struggled to pay rent, afford healthcare, or keep food on the table. The irony was too rich to ignore. He doubled down, imitating Harry's dramatic voice. "Yes, it was very hard. I had to wear a uniform at school. Do you know how traumatizing it is to have matching socks?" The crowd roared again. Maher straightened up, his timing perfect. "Meanwhile, the rest of us are working 3 jobs and living off ramen noodles. Harry, forgive us if we don't cry for you." The laughter was relentless. But beneath the comedy, the critique cut deep. Harry's brand had always been built on victimhood, escaping the coldness of the palace, the harsh glare of the press, the trauma of being the spare. Yet in Maher's hands, that narrative collapsed. It wasn't tragic. It was ridiculous, and the beauty of it, Maher wasn't making things up. He was using Harry's own words, his own stories, and turning them inside out. Every complaint Harry had ever aired now sounded petty, self-indulgent, and laughably out of touch. By the time the audience finally calmed, the damage was clear. Harry's victimhood had been reduced to a punchline, and the crowd wasn't sympathizing anymore. They were laughing at him, just as Maher intended. By now, the studio audience was fully locked in. Bill Maher had torn into Harry's endless truth-telling and shredded his pampered victimhood. But Maher, the master of timing, knew he couldn't stop there. He had to bring Meghan into the mix, and he had to take aim at the so-called exile lifestyle Harry now flaunted from Montecito. Maher leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of water like it was a fine wine. Then, with a deadpan delivery, he fired, "So Harry leaves Buckingham Palace. The castles, the crown, the history. He gives it all up for Wait for it, Montecito. I mean, let's be honest, it's sunny, it's avocado toast central, it's yoga pants heaven. But it's not exactly the gulag, is it? The audience erupted. The laughter was sharp, knowing. Everyone could picture the sprawling $14 million mansion, the endless photo shoots of Meghan and Harry posing in California sunlight while still pretending they were struggling. Maher smirked and leaned forward, adding another punch. He talks like he's living in exile, like he's Che Guevara in the jungle. Buddy, you're not dodging bullets. You're dodging your neighbor's Teslas on the way to Whole Foods. The laughter grew louder, people clapping, stamping their feet. Maher had just reduced the Sussex's entire California rebrand to a lifestyle joke. Less revolutionary escape, more suburban self-parody. Then he turned his sights directly on Meghan. He raised his eyebrows and added slyly, "And of course, Meghan's there, making sure every trauma is monetized. Book deals, podcasts, documentaries. Hell, if their Wi-Fi bill came late, they'd probably turn it into a 3-part Netflix special." The room exploded again. The dig was merciless, but it rang true. Even Harry's supporters couldn't deny that their brand seemed built on packaging every grievance into content. Maher's brilliance was in exposing the hypocrisy. Here was a couple who claimed they wanted privacy, but signed multi-million-dollar Netflix and Spotify deals to broadcast their lives. Here was Harry, who said he hated royal pageantry, yet staged drone-shot reveals of Montecito Gardens that looked suspiciously regal. And here was Meghan, who positioned herself as a modern feminist icon, while simultaneously cashing in on the royal status she supposedly rejected. The crowd loved it. Every line cut deeper. And Maher, like a seasoned boxer, was setting up the final knockout. And then, it happened. The line that would dominate headlines around the world. Maher, pacing the stage like a general surveying the battlefield, paused for dramatic effect. He looked straight into the camera, his voice calm, his smirk razor-sharp. Let's be real. Harry's not the spare. He's the error message. The palace didn't lose him. They debugged him. Harry isn't a royal rebel. He's a royal mistake, the studio exploded. Gasps, then roars of laughter, then applause that refused to stop. Some audience members literally stood to their feet, clapping, shouting, shaking their heads in disbelief at the brutality of the punchline. The cameras caught Maher's panelists burying their faces in their hands, laughing into their palms. One guest mouthed the words, "Oh my God," as the crowd continued cheering. It wasn't just a joke, as it was a cultural judgment, the kind of sharp satire that sticks in the bloodstream of public conversation. Social media lit up instantly. Clips of Maher's royal mistake line hit Twitter within minutes, spreading like wildfire. TikTok edits paired the joke with clips of Harry fumbling through interviews, his awkward Netflix appearances, his endless monologues about pain and trauma. Instagram Reels used the punchline over slow-motion montages of palace guards marching, ending with Harry's face in Montecito. The hashtag #DonchRoyalMistake trended globally, becoming the shorthand for Harry's entire post-palace saga. For weeks, the phrase appeared everywhere. In memes, op-eds, YouTube reaction videos, even late-night rival monologues. But what made the line devastating wasn't just its humor, it was its truth. Maher had distilled years of criticism into 3 words: royal mistake. Harry wasn't the tragic prince anymore. He wasn't the rebellious spare breaking free. He was the blunder, the accident, the error that the monarchy had quietly corrected by letting him walk away. And in that moment, Maher had done what no palace official, no tabloid columnist, and no political critic could do. He made the entire world laugh at Harry. Not out of malice, but out of recognition. Recognition that the prince who cried victim from a mansion in California was never the hero of the story. He was the joke. The moment Bill Maher uttered those 3 devastating words, a royal mistake, the internet did what it does best. It caught fire. Clips of the takedown were uploaded within seconds. Ripped straight from TV screens and live streams, plastered across Twitter, X, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts, and Facebook Reels. The first clip to go viral was the raw moment of delivery. Maher with his trademark smirk, leaning into the camera like he was about to read the evening news. Harry's not the spare. He's the error message. He's a royal mistake. The camera panned to the roaring audience. Some doubled over, some standing to clap, while Maher's panelists hid their faces in laughter. That 15-second clip was shared hundreds of thousands of times within hours. On Twitter X, hashtags like "Doffer royal mistake," "Doffer Maher vs Harry," and "Doffer Bill said it" shot to the top of global trends. Users paired the clip with GIFs of computer error screens flashing 404 not found, mocking Harry as the error message prince. Others pasted Maher's punchline over photos of Harry in Montecito, sipping lattes or walking his dogs, a not-so-subtle reminder that the victim prince was now living in luxury. TikTok, as always, turned it into a meme machine. Some creators slowed down Harry's interviews and overlaid Maher's royal mistake line, syncing it perfectly with Harry's blinking eyes. Others spliced together Harry's infamous Oprah interview with Meghan, cutting away mid-tier to Maher's devastating punchline. One compilation called The Royal Mistake Saga racked up over 20 million views in just 2 days. Instagram Reels leaned into satire. One edit placed Maher's voiceover against sweeping drone footage of Buckingham Palace, only to cut sharply to Harry in California. Captioned, "From Palace to Podcast. From Prince to Punchline." The comment sections were merciless. He wanted privacy. He got parody. On YouTube, reaction channels dissected every detail. Some broke down Maher's delivery, praising the timing, the precision, the cultural sting. Others focused on Harry's history of contradictions, pointing out how the joke worked because it condensed years of scandal into one unforgettable phrase. For days, Carrie's roast of Kimmel had been the talk of comedy circles. Now Maher had eclipsed it with a royal-level takedown. The speed and scale of the viral aftermath were staggering. Within 48 hours, the clip had been viewed tens of millions of times across platforms. Late-night television has always lived in the moment, but Maher's roast became something else entirely. A global cultural meme. If social media turned the roast into a meme, critics and cultural commentators turned it into a milestone. Newspapers, podcasts, and talk shows all weighed in, and the consensus was brutal for Harry. Variety ran the headline, "Maher cuts through royal illusions, Harry branded a royal mistake." Rolling Stone praised Maher's comedic courage, calling it a roast rooted in truth, not cruelty. Even The Guardian, often sympathetic to Harry, admitted Maher distilled years of public fatigue into one devastating line. Columnists noted how Maher's takedown captured a sentiment that had been bubbling for years. For a long time, Harry had benefited from sympathy. The tragic boy who lost his mother, the soldier prince trying to forge his own path. But that sympathy had been stretched thin by repeated interviews, memoirs, and documentaries. Maher gave voice to the exhaustion, framing Harry not as a hero, but as the embodiment of entitlement and self-pity. Comedians joined in too. Bill Burr, never one to hold back, laughed on his podcast. "Bill Maher just said what we all know. The guy's been whining for 10 years. At some point, stop cashing checks off your trauma." Ricky Gervais tweeted simply, "Royal mistake. Perfect." Even rival late-night hosts gave subtle nods. Stephen Colbert, smirking during his own monologue, joked, "I was going to talk about Harry tonight, but Maher already said it better." Jimmy Fallon, in his usual goofy tone, quipped, "Harry's not the spare, he's the oops." It was clear the comedy world had rallied behind Maher's punchline, but perhaps the most damning applause came from political commentators and media analysts. They argued Maher's line worked not just as comedy, but as social critique. One op-ed put it bluntly, "The joke resonated because it wasn't just funny, it was true." Harry represents the disconnect between privilege and authenticity in the modern age. He's the poster child for tone-deaf grievance, audiences agreed. Call-in radio shows lit up with callers praising Maher for finally saying it out loud. Comment sections flooded with people echoing the sentiment. "We've had enough of Harry's pity parties." The verdict was unanimous. Bill Maher's roast wasn't just a late-night punchline. It was a cultural takedown. He had crystallized years of frustration into one unforgettable phrase, and critics applauded him for it. When Bill Maher's roast went viral, every corner of social media exploded with reactions. Headlines piled up. Commentators dissected every word. Fans replayed the clip on loop. But amidst all the noise, one voice was conspicuously absent. Prince Harry's. Harry, who had built his entire post-royal career on speaking out, on giving interviews, on putting his truth front and center, suddenly had nothing to say. Not a word. Not a quip. Not even a carefully staged PR photo op with Meghan to brush it off. His silence was deafening, and it was telling. For years, Harry's strategy had been to dominate the conversation. If the tabloids ran a story he didn't like, he responded with an interview. If palace insiders whispered, he countered with a Netflix documentary. If critics raised questions, he produced a memoir. But Bill Maher's roast wasn't a scandal Harry could spin. It wasn't a headline he could sue. It was comedy, brutal, sharp, and untouchable. Behind the scenes, reports suggested Harry was furious. One insider claimed he called Maher's jokes disrespectful and low. Another suggested Meghan urged him to ignore it, warning that any public reaction would only amplify the humiliation. But for Harry, staying silent wasn't strength. It was weakness. It was the first time in years that he had no control over his narrative, and the longer he stayed quiet, the louder the laughter grew. Social media filled the void with speculation. Memes mocked Harry's silence as proof that the joke had landed too close to the truth. Some users captioned blank black screens, Harry's official response to being called a royal mistake. Others joked, for once, he's giving us the privacy he promised. His silence turned Maher's roast into something even bigger. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a cultural moment that Harry couldn't escape. By saying nothing, he confirmed everything. But Maher's roast wasn't just about Harry. It was about what Harry represented. The clash between privilege and authenticity. The growing public fatigue with celebrity victimhood. And the absurdity of royals trying to brand themselves as relatable underdogs. Maher tapped into a cultural frustration. Here was a man born into unimaginable wealth and privilege, who had turned grievance into a full-time career. And people were tired of it. They were tired of being told to empathize with a prince sipping lattes in Montecito while millions struggled to make ends meet. They were tired of Netflix deals framed as activism. They were tired of the hypocrisy, demanding privacy while cashing in on exposure. By calling Harry a royal mistake, Maher wasn't just mocking one man. He was mocking the entire spectacle. He was reminding audiences that comedy still had the power to puncture the self-importance of elites, whether they wore crowns, sat in palaces, or lounged in California mansions. Critics noted the broader significance. One columnist wrote, Maher's line worked because it wasn't just about Harry, it was about the culture of entitlement. It was about every celebrity who mistakes publicity for bravery and branding for authenticity. And the public agreed. The joke became a shorthand for everything people had grown disillusioned with. The endless Sussex interviews, the victim narratives, the contradictions, the hypocrisy. Maher had condensed years of criticism into one unforgettable phrase, and by doing so, he shifted the cultural lens. The bigger picture was clear. Harry wasn't just roasted. He was unmasked. And Bill Maher didn't just win a laugh. He won the argument. The beauty of Bill Maher's roast wasn't just in its delivery, it was in how ordinary people received it. In a culture oversaturated with celebrity narratives, polished interviews, and carefully scripted PR campaigns, Maher's blunt honesty landed like a thunderclap. Across the globe, audiences who had grown weary of Harry's constant oversharing felt a collective catharsis. On radio call-in shows, listeners laughed as hosts replayed the royal mistake clip. Callers lining up to say Maher had finally said out loud what we've all been thinking. One British caller quipped, "We paid for his protection, his palaces, his education. Now he's crying from Montecito." Bill Maher was right. He's a mistake and he's ours. In America, the reaction was just as sharp. Some applauded Maher for cutting through what they saw as Meghan and Harry's Hollywood charade. Others simply delighted in the comedy of it all. The absurdity of a prince complaining about hardships while living in a $14 million mansion. Social media echoed the sentiment. Instagram comment sections overflowed with laughter emojis and captions like, "Royal mistake." Case closed. YouTube reaction videos featured fans from across continents nodding in agreement, some admitting they'd once sympathized with Harry but had reached their breaking point. TikTok creators kept finding new ways to remix the line, inserting it into video games, political parodies, and even sports highlights. The phrase had transcended its original moment, but the most striking reaction came from younger audiences. Gen Z, notoriously skeptical of celebrity self-pity, embraced Maher's punchline as gospel. To them, Harry wasn't a victim or a rebel. He was a meme, a walking contradiction whose life story was less inspiring and more exhausting. Maher had crystallized that view into 3 unforgettable words. The public reaction was unanimous, and it was damning. Harry wasn't just roasted, he was reduced from a prince with a platform to a punchline repeated by millions. In the aftermath, 2 truths stood out as clear as day. Bill Maher won, and Prince Harry lost. For Maher, the roast cemented his status as one of comedy's last truth-tellers. He had always thrived on controversy, but this time he tapped into something universal: fatigue with entitlement disguised as suffering. He didn't just score laughs. He scored cultural resonance. His line wasn't mean for the sake of cruelty. It was surgical. It sliced through the fog of Harry's endless narrative and left behind clarity wrapped in comedy. Media outlets hailed it as one of Maher's sharpest moments in years. Commentators praised his ability to distill complex public frustrations into a single, unforgettable phrase. Comedians applauded the courage it took to say what many in Hollywood wouldn't dare. For Maher, it wasn't just another night on stage. It was a legacy moment, the kind people remember when they talk about the great roasts of late-night television. For Harry, however, the fallout was devastating. His brand, built on victimhood, resilience, and authenticity, now looked hollow. His silence only amplified the damage, and the more people repeated Maher's words, the more they stuck. Royal mistake wasn't just a punchline anymore. It became a label. In PR terms, Harry couldn't fight it. He couldn't sue it, spin it, or edit it out of a Netflix documentary. Comedy is untouchable in ways journalism isn't, and once the laughter started, it couldn't be stopped. For weeks, for months, Harry's every move was shadowed by the phrase. Articles about his upcoming projects slyly dropped Maher's words into headlines. Opinion pieces framed his life as proof of the joke's accuracy. And on social media, it became the go-to response anytime Harry opened his mouth. The contrast was stark. Bill Maher, the jester who spoke truth to power, versus Harry, the prince-turned-pity project who had lost control of his own story. One left the stage triumphant, cheered by millions. The other was left to stew in silence, mocked as the error message of the royal family. The verdict was final. Bill Maher hilariously destroyed Prince Harry, and history would remember it as the night the world stopped sympathizing with a prince and started laughing at a royal mistake.